Hello, everybody, and welcome to the College Sports Superfan. I'm so excited to bring you guys these videos. I think I'm going to start doing a weekly video kind of recapping what's going on in the world of college sports every single week. Probably going to be revealed every Monday or Tuesday. So thank you guys so much for joining me, and let's get right into this past week. The Big 12 football schedule was just revealed for next season, and here are top five, not in any particular order, well, chronological order, I should say. Top five college football games for next season in the Big 12. Starting in week zero, the Ireland game this upcoming season is going to be between Kansas State and Iowa State. I think this is going to be incredible because typically the game in Ireland is either between two mediocre teams like Nebraska and Northwestern that one year, or between two teams that one is expected to absolutely blow out the other, like Notre Dame versus Navy that one year, or this past season, Florida State versus Georgia Tech, which of course Florida State turned out to be terrible, but we didn't know that heading into this season. Well, this time around, it's going to be Iowa State and Kansas State, and who knows what the exact rankings are going to be of those teams, but I expect both of them to be top 25 caliber. They might be both in the top 25 heading into that game. They're both going to be very good, well matched teams, and that opening game will set the tone for both of their seasons. Number two, in week one, Bill Belichick's first ever game as head coach will be hosting TCU. So UNC's opener is against the TCU Horned Frogs, who have been a very difficult team to predict the last couple of years. Obviously, they had that magical run led by Max Duggan, who now is going to play in the UFL coming up in this spring in March. But Max Duggan led the TCU Horned Frogs all the way to the national championship game, only to get completely embarrassed by Georgia that year. Sonny Dykes has kind of been all over the place as the TCU head coach. They've had some decent years, that magical season. Who knows what to expect this time? And now Bill Belichick, now the oldest head coach in college football, replacing the previously oldest head coach in college football in Mac Brown, will take over the North Carolina Tar Heels in Chapel Hill. His journey will begin against TCU, and he's part of that 3 year deal. We'll see how much better UNC gets right away. And then also coming up early in the season in week one, Utah at UCLA. I really like this one. This is number three on my list because it is a classic Pac 12 rivalry. I guess now it's a classic because that league is gone. Utah and UCLA, I felt like were always a pretty good matchup, very evenly matched in the Pac 12. And I can't wait to see what's going to happen with their teams this season. Both of them had very disappointing years last year, more so Utah. UCLA was expected to be pretty bad last year, but Utah, their year being as terrible as it was a big shock. Let's see if they can turn things around in the Rose Bowl to start next season. Then we head over back to TCU in week six. Colorado goes on the road to take on TCU. Why is this one intriguing to me? Why do I have this in my top five? Well, because Deion Sanders' first big game as Colorado's head coach was against TCU. It was a home game. Now they go, or sorry, that was a road game as well. Excuse me. Now they go back on the road to Fort Worth once again to take on the Horned Frogs, which again, who knows with this matchup? I expect it to be a really evenly matched, fun game. And then in week nine, this one I just think is going to be a really good one, is going to be BYU on the road against Iowa State. BYU, I have a lot of belief in their team coming up this season. They returned their quarterback, Jake Retzlaff. That's always a big key. And the Cougars always seem to turn out competitive, hard nosed teams. I think there's a good chance BYU could end up in Dallas this year for the Big 12 championship game. But more than likely, this is going to be a difficult late game against Iowa State late in the season. Sorry, late in the season against Iowa State. Ames, not an easy place to play. If BYU is going to get to Dallas, they're probably going to have to go through Ames first. All right, now it is time for a college basketball update. Let's get right into this one. Auburn and Duke. Cooper Flag and Janai Broom. These two teams are competing to be the top team in the country right now, and they each have a player that's competing for Player of the Year. Here's Janai Broom stats compared to Cooper Flag stats. You guys let me know in the comments section down below who you think should be Player of the Year by this point. In my opinion, Cooper Flag has the slight edge just because he seems to be more impactful to his team overall at this point. And Janai Broom missed a couple of games due to a minor injury. So that's put him a little bit behind, but still, either one of them very much in the race. Very much this is a two-man race at this point. Auburn and Duke, they're the top two teams in the country in men's basketball. Clearly, Duke undefeated in ACC play, although the ACC very weak this year. The SEC, on the other hand, extremely difficult. Typically, it's the other way around, but not this season. So, even though Duke is undefeated, you got to look at it and go, well, they're the only ACC team that is even ranked at this point. I will say, though, Auburn only has one loss, and that one loss was on the road against Duke. That's their only loss of the season. It was a close game, but that is their only loss on the season. So if they were to lose another one, Duke would easily leapfrog them for that number one spot. But at this point, Auburn hasn't lost since then. They are 20-1. They just look like a machine with or without Janai Broom. This team is legit, but it's still going to be a very difficult SEC schedule ahead. They've still got their arch rival, Alabama, who's number three in the country, coming up relatively soon. That is undoubtedly going to be one of the biggest games of the year. Next up, speaking of rivalries, North Carolina getting blown out by Duke. Is it time to really say that Hubert Davis is in trouble? The Tar Heels are 13-10. They've already missed March Madness one time under Davis. That broke a long, what was it, a decade and a half? Maybe it was even close to 2 decades. I don't know. I don't know the exact year amount, but it was many, many years that North Carolina at least made the tournament, and to miss the tournament after a long time was a huge disaster. Now, of course, the other time Hubert Davis and North Carolina got into March Madness, they were the 8th seed, and they just got hot right at the right time and went all the way to the national championship game, defeating Duke in the Final Four to get there, and then they lost a thriller to Kansas. So they could have very easily won the national championship the one other time Davis was in there. So he's kind of been all over the place as a head coach, but at this point, you have R.J. Davis, who's one of the best guards in the country, an experienced guard who had the potential to be a Player of the Year candidate. You have Ian Jackson, who was a five-star freshman, who was one of the best freshmen coming in this season. You brought in Van Lubin, who's a really good center from Vanderbilt. The talent is there for this team. They bring back Elliot Cadeau. That's another really good guard. The talent is there for this team, and there was so much hype. So to only be 13-10 and struggling, and again, a weak ACC, I think Hubert Davis is going to be gone before the season ends. That's a prediction from me, and I don't think that's that bold of a prediction. Also, Tennessee is back. The Tennessee Volunteers were the last team to stay undefeated in men's basketball this season. Then they had that embarrassing blowout loss to one of their big rivals, Florida, on the road. And then recently they went through a 3-game losing streak. They've been slipping, but they got revenge over Florida. They hosted Florida and held the Gators to only 44 points, showcasing that elite Rick Barnes, Tennessee defense, and they did it without Zakai Ziegler and without Igor Milicic, who's their top rebounder. Those are two out of their top three best players, with Chaz Lanier being the other player. And Lanier showed up, Jordan Gainey showed up, and they were able to, for the most part, shut down that elite Florida offense and were able to pick up a 20-point win. This brought Tennessee back up to number 4 in the country. Not to mention their women's basketball team, who had also been losing, had beaten Missouri in a close one led by Talasia Cooper. So that was another big win for the women's team. And then also, speaking of women's teams, Iowa gets a massive, potentially season saving victory over number four USC as they came in. They retired Caitlin Clark's jersey, and at that time, that lit a fire under this Iowa team. They don't have head coach Lisa Bluter anymore. They obviously don't have Caitlin Clark anymore, and they have been not that great this season. They haven't. I was about to say they've been struggling, but they haven't been terrible. But they haven't been that great of a team. Somewhat of a bubble team this season. This win over number four USC puts Iowa right back into the women's tournament picture. Now 14-7. Let's see if the Hawkeyes can build on this momentum and see if USC can bounce back. But Iowa, they showed the formula for how to shut down Juju Watkins. And then how legit are Kansas and Houston? The Big 12 was absolutely crazy on Saturday. Kansas had the biggest blown lead in their team's history. They blew a 21-point halftime lead on the road against Baylor. Baylor has been struggling way more than expected this season with their stars Norchad Omier and VJ Edgecombe, a super talented one and done freshman. You would think this team would be better than they are. They still have the talent to be an intriguing team down the stretch, and they showed that with their incredible comeback upset over Kansas. Scott Drew is still legit. Rob Wright is a legit guard. That was one of the craziest games of Saturday. And then Houston at home breaking out the Houston Oilers throwback looking jerseys. That was an interesting game because Houston's at home. Texas Tech is on the road. Texas Tech is wearing the red colors, which are also Houston's colors. So that was kind of confusing to see that, kind of interesting. But Texas Tech loses their star player and top scorer right away because he threw a pass and kicked a player in a spot you're not supposed to kick a player. I'll just say that. And the refs thought it was intentional. They kicked him out. They kicked out the head coach. Texas Tech found a way to rally and beat Houston in one of the craziest games of the season by 1 point in overtime, breaking Houston's 33 game home winning streak. Now, we ask the question, how legit are Kansas and Houston? In my opinion, they are, in a lot of ways, still the top two teams in the Big 12, especially with Iowa State slipping. Before Iowa State, I felt like was a not a shoe-in to win the Big 12, but certainly a favorite. But the Cyclones have really been slipping, losing to West Virginia the way they did, losing to not a good Kansas State team, and then last night getting blown out by Kansas in that second half. Allen Fieldhouse, of course, a tough place to play, but still, Iowa State really seems like they're on the downturn. Houston and Kansas could definitely rebound and still win that league. And Baylor, of course, an interesting team to watch down the stretch, along with Texas Tech. And then finally, last point I wanted to say about college basketball is Kentucky. They've got another big prove it game tonight against Ole Miss. The Rebels have been really good in this first year with head coach Chris Beard. And as a result, Ole Miss is slight favorites at home over Kentucky. Kentucky, I think they've been a little bit better than expected with head coach Mark Pope. He kind of had to throw a team together last second, and they've had a really difficult schedule playing in the SEC this year, and he's managed to navigate it and actually lead them to a good season. So I think Mark Pope clearly is the guy, clearly is a better coach than head coach John Calipari, who did get revenge over his former team, but still, Kentucky is in a pretty good spot. Should be an interesting battle in Oxford tonight, though. And the other big game tonight is Marquette at St. John's playing at Marquette. Excuse me, St. John's the leader now in a tough Big East. That's pretty shocking. UConn all over the place. St. John's really could come out as the conference champion that year, which is not something you would expect from this squad. So that's a huge battle in the Big East tonight as well. And finally, the Diamond Sports are back. College softball is starting this Thursday, and college baseball is starting next Friday on the 14th. So, next week, I'll be breaking down more of the college baseball season as that's coming up. But first, let's start with college softball today. There's been some big time transfers over the course of the past season. Najeri Kennedy comes from Stanford, transfers to Texas Tech to be their starting pitcher. A lot of that has become possible because of NIL and the expansion of the transfer portal. Kennedy was a huge get in the portal as she is the top pitcher in all of college softball. Texas Tech, especially with Oklahoma and Texas leaving to go to the SEC, could be a sleeper team in the Big 12. Also, speaking of sleeper teams, are Nebraska because Jordy Ball, who's a previously legendary Oklahoma pitcher, transferred to her hometown team in Nebraska and sadly last season suffered a season ending injury literally in the first game of the season within the first few innings. But fortunately, as a result of that, was granted an extra year of eligibility. So now Jordy Ball is coming back ready for her season at Nebraska. Hopefully, no injuries will occur again this time, and the Cornhuskers could be a sleeper team to make it to the Women's College World Series. And then, speaking of Oklahoma, they had a four-peat last year when they defeated arch rival Texas for the second time in 3 years in the Women's College World Series championship. They defeated Florida State twice and then Texas twice during their 4 year national championship stretch. All those seniors are now gone, that legendary senior class that won so many games. And Oklahoma's transitioning now to a much more difficult conference in the SEC that is going to be absolutely loaded. As a result, Oklahoma's five-peat chances do look a little bit more challenging than their previous repeat national championship attempts. They're going to start the season ranked number three behind two other SEC teams, number one, Texas, and number two, Florida. Both those teams look very talented, very deep, and the SEC overall is a juggernaut this year. Not only are Texas, Florida, and Oklahoma the top three teams, but Tennessee also expected to be in the top five. Alabama is going to be really, really good. Missouri's really good. Georgia's really good. And there's also tons of sneaky teams like South Carolina, who just hired a brand new head coach coming in from Coastal Carolina, and she brings in a lot of talented players with her. So South Carolina could be a little bit of a sleeper team in the SEC this upcoming season. And then Kentucky also is going to be really good. So this league is extremely difficult. There's going to be top tier matchups every single weekend, and it's not going to be an easy out against any of these teams. So that'll make things a lot more interesting for Oklahoma and Texas. And then their other rival, Oklahoma State, they're a huge favorite to win the Big 12. But again, Texas Tech is a sleeper, and maybe even Baylor and Houston could also be a couple of intriguing sleeper teams in the Big 12. So that is softball coming up, and that is the end of this video. Thank you all so much for watching and supporting the College Sports Superfan. If you like this kind of content, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe. And let me know again who you think is going to win the Player of the Year between Cooper Flagg and Janai Broom. And also, you could leave a comment letting me know who you think is going to win the national championship this year in college softball. And then again, next week, I'll be doing a college baseball breakdown as well as some other topics going on in the world of college sports. Thank you all once again for watching, and please join me next week, right here on the College Sports Superfan.